So basically, you thought this whole thing was deliberate on the part of the police officer. It's, KJ, as you put it, a tactic to elicit information that could be used as an incriminating piece of evidence.
I think that was easy to see.
And they had
Yeah.
those 3 girls that they set him up with, like framed him with that. And still, look at him with his interview at the end. The guy is a sweetheart.
The focus of today's proceedings in the trial of Chris Carbert and Anthony Olienick continued to be on the second defendant as jurors finished watching a video of Anthony Olienick being interviewed by an RCMP officer shortly after his arrest on February 14th of 2022. Robert Krejcik reporting for Rebel News here in Lethbridge, Alberta. Chris Carbert and Anthony Olienick are both charged with conspiracy to murder. The Crown is alleging that the 2 men conspired to murder police officers during their time participating in the 2022 Coutts protest and blockade. They are also both charged with unlawful possession of a firearm for a purpose dangerous to the public peace. They're also both charged with mischief-inducing financial damages valued at over $5,000. Anthony Olienick is additionally charged with unlawful possession of an explosive device for a purpose dangerous to the public peace. The 2 men have pled not guilty to all the charges against them. The 2022 Coutts protest and blockade was a civilly disobedient and peaceful demonstration, much like the Freedom Convoy in Ottawa that occurred around the same time. Both demonstrations were broadly opposed to these mandates and edicts and orders issued by all levels of government, ostensibly in the interests of public health to reduce COVID-19 transmission. The protest and blockade intermittently obstructed cross-border traffic between the U.S. and Canada across the Coutts and Sweetgrass crossing that links Alberta and Montana. The interview of Anthony Olienick began shortly after his arrest around 5:40 p.m. on February 14th, 2022. It ended early the next morning, February 15th, 2022, around 1:30. Nobody is going to jump the gun and start anything. Those are 3 direct quotes from Anthony Olienick that he made during an interview with an RCMP officer shortly after his arrest. And what he's referring to is the RCMP officer's suggestion that Anthony Olienick and others were planning and preparing for some sort of violent confrontation with law enforcement. Remember, Anthony Olienick and Chris Carbert are being charged with conspiracy to murder. The government is alleging that they conspired to murder police officers. So the RCMP officer in this interview is seeking to elicit statements that would be incriminating towards those charges. Well, what you observed today mostly was this video of Anthony Olienick being interviewed or interrogated, whatever term you want to use, by this RCMP officer shortly after his arrest. So what are you seeing there? What do you think was a major takeaway? What caught your eye?
That was just torture to watch. It was like, we know what the rallies were like. They were so peaceful and loving. And then we just seen him come in there with those questions, and it was all lies.
Lots of lies going on. Yeah. Lots of intimidation. Lots of coercion. Yeah. Yeah. And I believed, I in my heart, I felt like I'm looking at an innocent man getting accused of something he didn't do. And oh my God, what he's going through.
Despite this, RCMP interviewing officers' repeated attempts to elicit incriminating statements from Anthony Olienick emphatically and repeatedly maintained that he had no intent, no plan to initiate violence against law enforcement. Anthony Olienick was not interviewed across the entirety of that 8-hour segment of detention. The portions in which he was being interviewed, however, were displayed for the jurors with several exceptions. There were components of the interview that were redacted. We would see this black screen with white lettering redacted put upon it. Justice David Lebrens, the judge overseeing this trial, advised jurors not to pay those redactions any mind and not to draw any inferences about it, that there was no evidence contained within those redactions that the jurors need consider when they retire to deliberate their verdicts. The rationale behind those redactions, however, was never shared with jurors. The first half of the video primarily focuses on Anthony Olienick's sharing of his rationale, his motivations for participating in this 2022 Coutts protest and blockade to this RCMP interviewing officer. And in his explanations, he's stating that this movement, this protest, is motivated by love, God, and freedom. He repeatedly emphasized those points. He spoke about the congenial nature, the brotherhood that was established between the protesters, the daily prayer sessions that they partook in, and warned about this growing tyranny and authoritarianism that he saw taking place in this country and in other Western states, and spoke about his concerns that this tyranny was going to get to a point of intolerable abuse. The RCMP interviewing officer, Andy Olford, repeatedly expressed agreement with Anthony Olienick as the accused explained his own concerns about a growing authoritarianism in Canada. Olford specifically mentioned the requirements to take these so-called vaccines in order to maintain one's job, either with some level of government or in the private sector. He also described as abusive these arbitrary capacity limits placed on people who sought to visit their ailing relatives or loved ones in places like nursing homes and hospitals, ostensibly in pursuit of public health, as per the demands of the COVID-19 enterprise. He also mentioned suppression of religious observance. For example, the arbitrary capacity limits placed on funerals, where people beyond a certain number could no longer help grieve their lost loved ones or friends or family members. He also said, this is a near quote, "I cannot believe seeing police officers participate in the forced shutdowns of churches that were engaging in worship or holding congregations and services in violation of the so-called public health lockdown orders." Olford's gamesmanship was obvious as the video progressed. You could see he was seeking to endear himself to Anthony Olienick, to establish this level of trust, to disarm Olienick, and his questioning was seeking to elicit some sort of incriminating statement, such as, "You must have been preparing something," or "What else were you doing?" He was saying things like, "These charges, the conspiracy to murder charge specifically, don't make sense given what you've told me," as if somehow there was some sort of missing information not being provided by Anthony Olienick that would help prove these allegations.
He was starving. Tony was hungry. He hadn't slept for maybe 2 days. I'm not sure how long. And they were taking advantage of that.
From mischief
And then
to
from
murdering.
mischief to murdering cops, and then they abandoned him intentionally for like 10 minutes to make him like it's a form of torture.
An emotional moment was seen in this video as the RCMP interviewing officer shows Anthony Olienick a video on his mobile phone. And the video is of Marco van Hugenbos calling for an end of the Coutts protest and blockade. Marco van Hugenbos was a noteworthy member of this demonstration. He was described as a member of the leadership by the government. He was charged and convicted of mischief over $5,000 in this courtroom. His sentencing is coming up at the end of July. And while calling for an end of the protest, Marco van Hugenbos states that the rationale for this end is that he had become aware of charges being laid against certain members of the Coutts protest and blockade related to weapons charges. And Marco van Hugenbos said that in order to maintain a peaceful narrative around this protest, that they should roll out and end it in order not to be linked with these charges which connect to some potential for violence. And when showing Anthony Olienick this video on his mobile phone, the RCMP officer is implicating Anthony Olienick as being the one who killed the movement, the one who led to the demise of the protest. And Anthony Olienick, being very emotionally and passionately invested in this protest, became very despondent and anguished. He immediately put his hands onto his head, he put his head down on the desk. You could see he was very distressed. He thought that he had been personally responsible for the end of what he thought to be a very important protest. After Anthony Olienick became visibly anguished and distressed, this RCMP interviewing officer, Andy Olienick, said that this pure movement had now been tarnished because of Anthony Olienick's conduct. The RCMP officer never specified what that conduct was, but placed the blame on Anthony Olienick for somehow undermining and killing this noble cause. Quote, It's not like what you guys are saying, a militia group, a terrorist group. That's how the government and media will spin it. Anthony Olienick said that to the RCMP officer that was interviewing him. When warning of usurpacious and tyrannical governments that abused and suppressed their populations, Anthony Olienick referenced Schindler's List. When describing his fear of law enforcement using violence against the protesters, Anthony Olienick described himself as a sheepdog in the capacity of the protest, there to protect the demonstrators in the event that police officers will begin to use extreme violence against them. So basically, you thought this whole thing was deliberate on the part of the police officer. It's, KJ, as you put it, a tactic to elicit information that could be used as an incriminating piece of evidence.
I think that was easy to see.
And they had
Yeah.
those 3 girls that they set him up with, like framed him with that. And still, look at him with his interview at the end. The guy is a sweetheart.
And you think that comes across in the video, right?
And Tony is so smart as to what's going on in this world. Like, we've talked on the phone many times, and it's just amazing. It's like, Tony, how do you know all that in there? Like, he knew all this a long time ago.
I filled out a form today called a request for exhibit because I want you folks in the audience to see this video, the RCMP officer's interview with Anthony Olienick, for yourselves, and not simply rely on me to relay what I think are the most important takeaways. I wrote, quote, "I intend to publish excerpts of the video for journalistic purposes." So this request will get sent to the judge. He'll have discretion over whether or not to approve or deny this request, but I don't anticipate any problems because this video has already been aired in its entirety in a courtroom that's open to the public. So let's cross our fingers and hope this judge does the right thing, releases it to me so that we can publish it at Rebel News so you folks can see it for yourselves. So-called mainstream media are essentially entirely absent from this trial. I've been in the courtroom for proceedings every day, so I can give you an authoritative comment on that. I basically never see them. We at Rebel News understand that this trial is of deep importance to Canadians and the broader English-speaking world, and we hope you folks out there in our dear Rebel News audience agree with us. And if you do, please remember that we have operational costs. We can't pursue this journalistic endeavor for free, which is where you all come in. Please contribute to us. Visit truckertrial.com and donate to keep this program running so that we can keep delivering the other side of the story, which otherwise would not be presented by the usual suspects who are on the take from the federal government.